I gave my entire life to my only child, believing love and loyalty would be enough, until the night he shoved me to the floor and snarled, "You're nothing without me." In that instant, decades of sacrifice turned into a wound so deep it would change everything forever. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 64 years old, a widower, and for most of my adult life I worked as a maintenance foreman at Lake Erie Ship Systems. The job was hard and unglamorous, filled with grease, clanging metal, and long nights, but it paid for the modest wooden house I bought in Cleveland, Ohio. I spent 30 years paying off that mortgage, every payment a reminder of why I was working, so that my wife and I would have a place of our own, a place to grow old together. She is gone now, and the house remains, holding her memory in its quiet corners. Each morning I still wake up at 5 o'clock out of habit. The rhythm of work never left me. I shuffle to the kitchen, grind coffee beans, and brew a strong black cup without sugar. Outside on the porch, a few clay pots of basil wait for their daily watering. The smell of damp earth mixes with the bitter steam of coffee as I watch the neighborhood begin to stir. The Cleveland Guardians are always in the newspaper, and I follow their ups and downs as if the game could still bring me the kind of comfort it once did when my son and I watched together. Back then, he was a boy who clapped whenever a batter hit the ball beyond the field. Those days seem like a dream now. My son Logan is 36 years old. He came back to my house 3 years ago after a divorce that was supposed to be temporary, just until he got back on his feet. At first, I believed him. I opened the door without hesitation, but the arrangement that was meant to last a few months stretched into years, and somewhere along the way, I stopped being the owner of my home. Logan took control of everything, most painfully, my finances. Each month, my $1,400 pension check is deposited into a shared account that he manages. From that sum, he hands me $25 a week like an allowance for a child. He tells me it is for my safety, that I am too old to keep track of bills and cash. What it really means is that I live under his thumb in the house I paid for. Logan wears pressed suits, drives an expensive car, and presents himself to the world as a successful professional. Behind those doors, though, he is something else. His voice carries an edge that keeps me cautious. He can smile in front of others and turn cold the moment they leave. His partner Aubrey is younger, polished, always arriving in fashionable dresses. To Logan, she is affectionate, a perfect companion. To me, she is distant, quick with polite words when he watches, but otherwise treating me like I am the hired help. She speaks to me with that sing-song courtesy reserved for people you do not respect but must tolerate. I have become the background of their lives, cooking, cleaning, shuffling around silently so as not to invite criticism. The living room used to be my workshop. I called it the shop, even though it was just a corner with a battered toolbox and a bench where I fixed small appliances. My wife gave me that toolbox when we first married. After Logan moved in, the box was relocated to a closet, and now I have to ask for the key to open it. Imagine needing permission to touch the tools that once built shelves for my son's room, or patch the leaky pipes that kept us warm through winters. Every reminder tells me I no longer have a say. Not in this house, not in my life. I have grown used to moving quietly, speaking in low tones, and cleaning before anyone else wakes up to avoid being scolded. It is a routine carved into me by years of trying to keep peace. Age makes it easier to surrender than to fight. I convinced myself that silence was a form of survival, but silence wears on the soul. It eats at the dignity you still have. I knew somewhere deep that I had spoiled Logan, given too much without demanding respect, and now he believed he was owed everything. Last night changed me. It was only a bowl of soup, chicken broth with vegetables, something simple I thought would be warm and filling. I forgot the salt. When Logan tasted it, his face twisted with anger. He hurled the bowl into the sink, hot liquid splashing, and then his fist struck me. I fell against the kitchen counter, my lips split, my ear ringing. He left me there and went to his room as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The bruises on my body are tender reminders, but the deeper wound is the realization that I am treated not as a father, not even as a man, but as a servant who deserves punishment. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, pain throbbing in my jaw, thinking about the decades I gave up so much to raise him. I thought about my wife, about how she would never forgive me for allowing this to happen. And as the dawn light filtered through the curtains, I came to a conclusion. I could not be the quiet man anymore, not if I wanted to die with a shred of honor. I am the one who lived this life, and I will be the one to tell it. Every bruise will be evidence, every scar will be testimony. For the first time in years, I whispered to myself that this story will not end in silence. It will end with me opening the door that fear has kept locked. If you're still watching and feel the weight of this pain, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Let's keep going together. The night before still throbbed in my bones when I dragged myself out of bed. I had cooked a simple chicken soup for dinner, just as I had done countless times before, and forgot to twist the cap off the salt shaker. 1 spoonful, and Logan exploded. He hurled the bowl into the sink, hot broth splattering across my arm, and his fist came down on me as if I were a stranger who had insulted him. My head slammed against the cabinet, my lips split, and the ringing in my ear drowned out his curses. When I crumpled to the floor, he didn't even pause. He stormed off, slammed his door, and I heard the steady hum of his white noise machine fill the silence, masking any trace of what had just happened. To him, it was nothing more than another evening. To me, it was humiliation written in bruises. By morning, the swelling in my face had settled into a dull ache. I brewed coffee, scrambled eggs, and toasted bread the way Logan liked, because that was what I did. At 7 sharp, he appeared in his gray suit, phone in one hand, briefcase in the other, as if last night had been a dream I had invented. He sat down at the table, barely glancing at me. "Remember," he said, his voice smooth but sharp beneath the surface, "don't start telling stories to the neighbors. Someone from the firm is coming over for a performance review this week, and I don't need distractions." He didn't have to raise his voice. The threat was woven into the calmness. He wanted me to know that my silence was not optional. It was required. I nodded, though bile rose in my throat. Moments later, Aubrey arrived. She wore a pale blue dress and heels that clicked against the hardwood floor. She kissed Logan on the cheek, set her purse down, and turned to me with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Here," she said softly, pulling a tube of concealer from her bag. "Put some on. It'll save Logan the headache." Her tone was pleasant, but the implication was clear. Cover the evidence, keep the facade intact. I took the tube without a word. Her kindness was performative, a little play she performed when Logan was in the room. Outside of his gaze, I was an inconvenience. Yet in that moment, something shifted inside me. For years I had been silent, swallowing every insult, obeying every command. But this morning, silence didn't feel like survival. It felt like complicity. After Logan and Aubrey left, the house was quiet again, except for the ticking of the old clock above the stove. I stood there, tube of makeup in my hand, staring at my reflection in the microwave door. The man who looked back at me was tired, worn, and ashamed, but beneath the shame was something else, something sharp, a flicker of rage. At 8:50, the phone rang. The landline, no one ever called it anymore. My chest tightened as I lifted the receiver. "Mr. Bennett?" a voice asked politely. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Milo Chen, accountant at North Coast Capital Partners. I apologize for the short notice, but we've noticed some unusual transfers moving through a bank account in your name. Could you stop by the office this afternoon? It's important." For a moment I couldn't speak. The words spun in my head. Unusual transfers. In my name. My hand trembled against the receiver. I don't understand, I finally managed. "It would be better to explain in person," Milo said firmly, but not unkindly. "Please, if you can, come by at 3 o'clock. We'll have everything prepared." "All right," I whispered and hung up. I stood in the kitchen for several minutes, staring at nothing, hearing only the pounding of my own heart. Logan. It had to be him. He had access to everything: my pension, my accounts, even my house deed. If my name was tied to whatever he had done, I wasn't just a victim anymore. I could be dragged into his crimes, blamed for things I didn't even know about. My eyes wandered to the far wall above the sink. There, just above the backsplash, was a jagged crack that had crept wider over the years. I used to tell myself I'd fix it, but I never did. Now it looked like a fracture in the foundation itself, a line that threatened to split the house in two. I realized then that it mirrored me. My patience, my silence, my willingness to endure, all of it had cracked. And now, with this phone call, the fracture was widening past repair. I rinsed the coffee mugs, wiped the counter, and set the tube of concealer aside. Then I went to my bedroom, laced up my worn sneakers, and stood at the doorway. For the first time in years, I wasn't just moving to serve Logan or Aubrey. I was moving for myself. "I'll try," I whispered under my breath. "Just for one day, I'll try being someone else." The house seemed to hold its breath as I stepped outside, locking the door behind me. The cool air brushed against my bruised cheek, and it stung. But for the first time in a long time, the sting didn't feel like shame. It felt like possibility. If you're still here and sensing how tension is quietly building, drop number 2 in the comments so I know you haven't looked away. I left the house earlier than I usually would, locking the door behind me with a trembling hand. Logan thought I would stay hidden inside, patching up my bruises, but I had a destination. The bus ride into downtown Cleveland was quiet, the kind of quiet where every rattle of the window reminded me of how fragile my resolve was. The streets grew taller and shinier the closer we got to the financial district, until finally the bus let me off in front of a skyscraper of glass and steel. The sign above the revolving doors read, "North Coast Capital Partners." I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring up at the building that reflected the gray Ohio sky. Men and women in pressed suits moved briskly past me, their shoes clicking on the pavement, their conversations about markets and mergers spilling into the air. I felt out of place, an old man in a worn jacket and scuffed shoes, stepping into a world that did not belong to me. Still, I walked forward, through the spinning glass doors, into a lobby so wide it seemed to echo. Security guards flanked the desk, and a receptionist with a headset smiled politely. "I'm here to see Milo Chen," I said, my voice catching. "Of course, sir," she replied, typing something into her computer before handing me a visitor badge. 18th floor. Someone will escort you." Moments later, I was in an elevator, the kind that rises so quickly your ears pop. My heart was racing before I even stepped into Milo's office. Milo Chen greeted me with a firm handshake. He was in his early 40s, tidy glasses, a dark tie, and a serious but not unkind expression. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, have a seat." He gestured to a chair across from his desk, where a thick folder sat waiting. "I'm afraid I don't really understand why I'm here," I admitted as I sat down. "That's exactly why I wanted to speak with you," Milo said. He opened the folder and pushed a stack of papers toward me. "These are bank statements from the last 6 months. More than $45,000 has moved through an account in your name. Each time, the funds were withdrawn immediately after arrival." I blinked at the pages. My name was there, printed clearly. My bank account numbers, my supposed transactions. The columns of numbers swam in front of me. This can't be right. I haven't withdrawn anything. Milo folded his hands. "I believe you. That's why we contacted you directly. Based on our internal investigation, we suspect your son, Logan Bennett, has been using your account to move company funds. The transfers start from corporate accounts, route briefly into yours, and then disappear into cash withdrawals or secondary accounts." My stomach turned. Logan. Of course it was Logan. He had taken my pension, my savings, my house, and now he was using me to cover his thefts. "I never agreed to this," I whispered. "I don't think you did," Milo said, his voice even. "But if you don't file a formal complaint, the law will consider you complicit. The trail leads straight to your name. Without your cooperation, you could be held responsible for embezzlement." The words hit me harder than Logan's fists ever had. I gripped the arms of the chair, feeling the blood rush in my ears. To the world outside, I was no longer just a broken man hiding bruises. I was a potential criminal. Milo leaned forward. "Mr. Bennett, I understand this is overwhelming, but you must protect yourself. If you file a complaint, we can separate your name from his actions. Otherwise, when this goes to the authorities, you'll be standing right next to him in court." I wanted to scream, to tear the papers in half, to deny everything. But deep down, I knew Milo was right. Silence had kept me alive in my house, but silence here could bury me under charges I didn't deserve. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my voice shaking. "Don't wait too long," Milo warned gently. "The window to protect yourself is closing." I left his office with the folder pressed against my chest, as if it might shield me. The elevator ride down felt endless, the walls closing in. When I finally stepped outside, the wind slapped my face. I walked a block before I felt it, the prickling on the back of my neck, the sense of being watched. I slowed at the corner and glanced over my shoulder. A man in a black coat lingered across the street, pretending to check his phone. When my eyes met his, he shifted behind a telephone pole. My pulse spiked. Was it paranoia, or was someone truly following me? I kept walking, quickening my pace. Each time I glanced back, the man was there, a shadow trailing me just far enough to stay unnoticed by others. By the time I reached the bus stop, my hands were clammy. The folder in my arm seemed heavier with each passing second. This wasn't just about bruises anymore. It wasn't just about soup without salt. Logan had dragged me into something far darker, something that reached beyond the walls of our home. As the bus doors opened and I stepped inside, I pressed the folder to my chest and made a silent vow. I was done being silent. If you're still watching and shocked by how fast things turn, type number 3 below. I want to see who's still holding their breath with me. The bus ride back from downtown Cleveland felt longer than the one that had carried me there. I sat by the window with Milo's folder pressed against my chest, every jolt of the bus rattling my nerves. My mind churned in circles. If I filed the complaint, I would be putting myself directly against Logan, my own son. I knew what he was capable of when angry. The bruises still fresh on my face told that story clearly enough. But if I stayed quiet, I could end up being named in whatever financial mess he had created. Either choice seemed like a door into disaster. I felt as if I were stuck between two cliffs, and whichever way I stepped, I'd fall. When the bus pulled to my stop, I didn't get off. My feet stayed planted, as if they had a will of their own. I let the bus roll past my neighborhood and closer to the lakefront, where an old public library stood tucked between office buildings. I hadn't been inside that library in years. Its stone facade and tall windows looked weathered but dignified, like an old judge who had seen everything. Something inside me whispered that maybe, just maybe, I might find answers there. The library was nearly empty. A faint smell of dust and old paper floated through the air. The librarian barely glanced at me as I walked past the front desk. I made my way to a row of computers along the wall, their screens glowing a cold blue. Sitting down, I typed slowly with 2 fingers. Domestic abuse victim rights. Then, how to report financial fraud. Each click made me paranoid. I half expected Logan's hand to land on my shoulder, demanding to know what I was doing. But it wasn't Logan behind me, it was silence, the heavy kind that filled the building. I printed several pages that listed phone numbers for hotlines, steps for filing official complaints, and explanations of legal protections. The printer buzzed loudly, and I snatched the papers the moment they slid out, stuffing them into the inside pocket of my coat. Even then, I kept glancing around, certain someone would accuse me of doing something wrong. Old habits die hard when you've lived under surveillance. Leaving the library, I felt the papers pressing against my chest like a hidden weapon. They were thin sheets of white paper, but to me they felt like the first tools of freedom. On the way home, I cut through a row of houses where the maples leaned heavy with late summer leaves. As I turned a corner, I saw Clara Jacobs, my neighbor from 2 doors down. She was outside watering her flowers, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face. Clara had been widowed a decade ago, and though she always carried herself with grace, there was a loneliness in her eyes I had recognized long ago. "Harold," she called, setting down her watering can. Her gaze lingered on the bruise along my jaw. "Are you all right?" My hand instinctively brushed against the mark. "I slipped on the stairs," I muttered, forcing a half smile. Clara tilted her head, studying me. "That must have been some fall," she said softly. Her voice wasn't accusing, but I could see the disbelief. "I'm fine," I insisted quickly. I couldn't risk Logan finding out I had talked. Clara hesitated, her eyes still heavy with concern, but she let it go, only giving me a small nod before returning to her flowers. Her look stayed with me all the way home. When I opened the door, Logan was already there, tie loosened, jacket tossed across the sofa. The television flickered with highlights from a baseball game. He looked up the moment I stepped in. "Where were you?" he asked, his tone sharp though his eyes stayed on the screen. "Grocery store," I said, keeping my voice even. He studied me for a long second, the silence stretching, before finally turning back to the game. "Don't forget Aubrey's friend is visiting tomorrow," he said. "House better be spotless." I nodded and slipped past him, heart pounding. Somehow, he hadn't asked more. Somehow, he hadn't discovered the papers in my pocket. That night, after Logan and Aubrey had gone to bed, I slipped into the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the faint hum of the old fan to mask any sound, then pulled out the papers and spread them on my knees. The light above the mirror was dim, but it was enough to read. My eyes scanned every line: rights of domestic abuse victims, the promise of anonymity in reporting crimes, the assurance that age did not strip me of dignity. I underlined numbers with my finger, memorizing them. Each line whispered possibilities I had long forgotten I had. For the first time in years, I wasn't just enduring. I was searching, reaching, daring to think about a way out. My hands still shook, but it wasn't only from fear. It was also from the unfamiliar tremor of hope. When I finally put the papers away, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The bruises stared back, but so did something else. A man who had finally taken his first step away from silence. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds, casting stripes of pale light across the kitchen table. I moved with careful precision, setting out scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee the way Logan liked them, though my hands trembled as I worked. He sat in his usual chair, phone in one hand, eyes flicking toward me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. The silence between us was heavier than usual, filled with suspicion rather than simple disdain. I tried to focus on the rhythm of breakfast, pouring coffee, buttering bread, scraping plates, but the weight of Milo's words from yesterday clung to me. File a complaint or risk being branded complicit. Every sound in the room felt amplified. The scrape of Logan's fork, the tick of the kitchen clock, the slow drip of the coffee pot. I could feel him studying me, waiting for a mistake. Then it came, swift and brutal. Logan rose from his chair without a word and walked toward the bathroom. My heart lurched. I'd forgotten. The torn scrap of paper from the library. I had shoved it into the trash can, thinking it buried under tissues and soap wrappers. I heard the metallic squeak of the bin lid, followed by silence. When he returned, his face was a storm barely contained. He slapped the scrap of paper onto the kitchen table, the words "domestic abuse hotline" staring back at me like an exposed wound. "What the hell is this?" His voice was low, more terrifying than a shout. I don't know," I stammered. My throat was dry, my pulse hammering. "Don't lie to me," he snapped, slamming his palm onto the table so hard the dishes rattled. "You've been snooping, haven't you? Talking to people, planning something." I shook my head, but the words tangled in my mouth. "It's nothing. I found it." He leaned close, his face inches from mine, his breath sharp with coffee. "You think you can betray me? After everything I've done for you? I'll make sure you regret it." I shrank back in my chair, but he pressed on, his voice turning icy and deliberate. "You know what I can do? I can go to a lawyer tomorrow and file for guardianship. Tell them you've lost your mind, that you're no longer capable of making decisions. Do you know what happens then? They'll sign over everything to me, your accounts, your house, every cent you've ever touched, and you'll be nothing more than an old man in a care home, drooling into a paper cup. The words landed like punches, harder than his fists had ever been. My breath came in shallow gasps, sweat beading at my temples. In his eyes, I saw not just cruelty, but calculation. He wasn't just a violent son, he was a predator using the law as his weapon. For a moment, I felt my resolve crumble. I saw myself locked away, my dignity stripped, my life erased. But underneath the terror, something else stirred. Anger. I realized I was staring at the full measure of his corruption. This wasn't about love or even anger. It was about control. He wanted to own me entirely, body and soul. The shrill chime of the doorbell cut through the tension like a blade. Logan straightened instantly, smoothing his tie, his mask snapping back into place. He shot me a warning glance before striding to the door. When it swung open, there stood Clara Jacobs, holding a steaming pot wrapped in a towel. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I made extra soup and thought Harold might like some." Logan's smile appeared as if conjured by a switch. "Mrs. Jacobs, how kind of you. He'll love it, won't you, Dad?" He reached for the pot with exaggerated charm, thanking her as though he were the perfect son. Clara stepped inside just enough to hand it over, her eyes flicking past him to me. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, my hands still trembling. Our eyes met, and in that brief glance I knew she sensed something. Her gaze lingered on my hunched shoulders, my downcast face, the scrap of paper still on the table. The air in the house felt thick, suffocating, but she didn't press. "Well," she said softly, "I'll let you enjoy it. Take care, Harold." "Of course, did you?" Logan said smoothly, ushering her out. "You're always so thoughtful." The door clicked shut, and the smile vanished from his face like it had never existed. He set the soup on the counter and turned back to me, his eyes cold and sharp. "Don't think anyone's coming to save you," he muttered. "One word, one mistake, and I'll make good on every threat I've just made." Clara's footsteps faded outside, but her presence lingered in my mind. For the first time, I wondered if someone else could see the truth. If maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as invisible as Logan wanted me to be. I sat back down at the kitchen table, my heart still pounding. Fear clawed at my chest, but beneath it was something more dangerous for him, the seed of defiance. For years I had bowed under his control, but now the mask had slipped and I had seen the monster behind it. And once you see the monster, you can't pretend he's not there. The house was quiet that night, though the silence felt more like a trap than peace. Logan had retreated to his room after dinner, his footsteps heavy on the stairs, his door shutting with a finality that told me he was done with me for the evening. Yet I could still feel him in every corner of the house, like smoke that clung to the walls. My hands shook as I carried a small box of tools and the folder Milo had given me down to the garage. The garage had always been my retreat, the one place I could pretend to fix broken things, even if the real brokenness lived upstairs. I set the folder on my workbench, alongside the papers I had printed at the library. The desk lamp's yellow light threw shadows across the concrete floor. I flipped through the documents again, steps for filing a complaint, the rights of victims, the hotline number circled in red. Each word was both a lifeline and a sentence. If I used them, I would finally be fighting back. But if Logan discovered my plans before I was ready, I had no doubt he would destroy me, legally or physically. My eyes lingered on the line that read, "Victims cannot be coerced into silence." It felt almost laughable. Silence had been my entire existence. I thought of Milo's warning, "If you don't act, the law will see you as complicit," and the walls seemed to close in tighter. The decision hung over me like a noose. A soft knock at the garage door startled me. I froze, panic rising in my throat. For a moment, I imagined Logan standing there, having followed me, ready to unleash fury. I nearly didn't open it, but then a gentle voice floated through the door. "Harold, it's Clara. I brought you something." Relief mingled with dread. I opened the door cautiously. There she was, her silver hair tucked under a scarf, a small box in her hands. The scent of cinnamon drifted from it. "I thought you might want some cookies," she said with a tentative smile. I couldn't sleep. I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." She looked around the garage, her eyes resting on the scattered papers. She didn't press immediately, just set the cookies on the bench and folded her hands. "You've seemed off lately," she said gently. "And I don't believe that stare story you gave me earlier. I've lived too long to mistake a bruise like that for a clumsy fall." I swallowed hard, words catching in my throat. She was offering me a chance, but trust felt like stepping onto thin ice. Still, something inside me cracked. "Things aren't easy," I admitted. "Logan, he's not the son I raised." Clara's eyes softened, though I could see a sharpness behind them. "You don't need to explain everything. But you don't have to go through it alone either." She lowered her voice. "My niece, Emily, works as a lawyer for the state prosecutor's office. She handles financial crimes and domestic cases. If you ever wanted to talk to someone who knows the system, she'd help." Her words landed like a spark in the dark. A lawyer in the prosecutor's office, someone who could see through Logan's facade, someone with the authority to fight him. Hope flickered in my chest, but fear quickly smothered it. "If he finds out," I whispered, "he'll ruin me. He said he'd go to court, have me declared incompetent. I could lose everything." Clara reached out, her hand warm as it rested on mine. "Harold, he's already taken nearly everything from you, your peace, your dignity, your freedom. Don't let him take your future too. My niece is discreet. She won't move a finger without your permission, but you need someone on your side." I closed my eyes, the weight of her words pressing against the years of silence I'd endured. Every instinct screamed to stay quiet, to keep my head down, to survive. But another voice, faint but steady, whispered that survival was no longer enough. When I opened my eyes, I saw Clara watching me with quiet determination. For the first time in years, I felt the presence of an ally who wasn't afraid of Logan. "I'll do it," I said, my voice almost foreign in my ears. "I'll talk to Milo. And, if your niece is willing, I'll meet her too." Clara squeezed my hand, relief softening her features. "I'll arrange it, carefully. You won't be alone in this." After she left, I sat back at the workbench, staring at the folder and the stack of papers. The words didn't look like threats anymore. They looked like tools, weapons even. The choice had been made. For the first time in years, fear wasn't the only thing guiding me. Upstairs, the house groaned with Logan's footsteps as he moved about his room. His shadow still stretched long across my life, but I felt a shift inside me. Tonight, I had chosen a path that would lead me out of his grip. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew he would fight with everything he had. But for the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing. And that choice would change everything. The days that followed my decision carried a strange shift inside me. I didn't walk taller, but I no longer kept my eyes glued to the floor. My hands still trembled at times, yet there was a faint steadiness in my chest that hadn't been there before. Logan, ever attuned to the smallest change in my demeanor, sensed it immediately. He studied me like a predator circling prey that no longer cowered quite the same way. "You're different," he said one morning, narrowing his eyes as I set his coffee on the table. His tone was casual, but I knew better. "Don't start thinking you can fool me, old man." I forced a thin smile and turned away, though the weight of his gaze stayed on my back long after. From that day forward, his suspicion grew. He started picking up my phone when I left it on the counter, scrolling through my calls and messages. The screen was always blank, of course. He made sure I hardly had anyone left to contact. But he checked anyway, desperate to catch me in some imagined betrayal. At night, he'd appear suddenly at my door, demanding to know what I was doing. If I hesitated even for a breath, he would lean in close and hiss, "Don't plot against me. I'll know." His surveillance tightened. Trips outside were questioned with interrogation-level intensity. A simple walk to the corner store required an explanation. What I was buying, how long I would take, whether I had money. The walls of my own home felt like prison bars, closing tighter each day. But inside me, That seed of defiance Clara had helped plant was growing. I held on to the thought of Milo's folder, the hotline numbers, and Clara's promise of her niece. I knew there was a way out, even if Logan's grip was trying harder than ever to crush me. The breaking point came late one evening. I had retreated to the garage, needing air, needing space. I thought I had been careful, too careful. On the workbench, tucked beneath a box of screws, was a small slip of paper with a number scribbled in my handwriting. Emily Jacobs, Clara's niece. I had copied it down in a shaky hand earlier that day, my lifeline disguised as a scrap. Logan came down the stairs unexpectedly. I froze as his shadow darkened the garage door. He scanned the room, his eyes darting like a hawk, until they landed on the slip of paper half exposed. He snatched it up, holding it between two fingers like damning evidence. "What's this?" His voice was a low growl. "It's nothing," I said quickly, my mouth dry. "Just a note." "Don't lie to me." His roar filled the garage, reverberating off the walls. "Who's Emily Jacobs? Who the hell have you been talking to?" I backed away, hands raised, but he advanced, the paper crumpling in his fist. "You think you can outsmart me? You think you can crawl to outsiders and turn them against me? You're just an old fool digging his own grave." Before I could answer, his rage exploded. He shoved me hard, the force sending me sprawling backward onto the cold cement floor. Pain shot through my shoulder as it struck the ground, the impact rattling through my bones. The air rushed from my lungs in a gasp. "You'll never win," Logan snarled, looming over me. "If you keep this up, you won't just lose your house. You'll lose everything." I struggled to sit up, clutching my arm. My body ached, but worse was the humiliation, being thrown like a sack of garbage in the place I once called sanctuary. Then, from outside, a sound I hadn't expected, a faint gasp. The small window above the workbench glowed with the spill of a porch light, and beyond it stood Clara. Her face was pale, her hands clutching her phone, its camera aimed squarely at the scene. Logan didn't notice her. He stormed off, muttering curses, leaving me sprawled on the floor. The door slammed upstairs, rattling the frame. Silence returned, but it was no longer oppressive. I sat there in the dim light, breathing hard, my body screaming with pain. Yet deep inside, a new awareness burned. Clara had seen. She had captured proof of what I endured, proof that couldn't be explained away as clumsiness or exaggeration. As I leaned against the wall, the ache in my shoulder pulsing, I realized something remarkable. Logan's violence, the very thing he used to control me, was now working against him. Every shove, every bruise, every cruel word was becoming a record, a trail leading him straight to the reckoning he so desperately thought he could avoid. That night, lying awake with my arm throbbing, I clung to that thought. My son was more dangerous than ever, yes, but he was also digging his own grave. And for the first time in years, I felt the scales begin to tip in my favor. The pain in my shoulder lingered for days after Logan shoved me onto the garage floor. Each movement reminded me of that night, of the rage in his eyes, of the helplessness I felt as I hit the cement. But there was something else I couldn't forget. The faint glow of a phone screen outside the window, Clara's trembling hands recording the truth at last. For the first time in years, I had proof that couldn't be twisted into lies. Clara came over that very evening, after Logan had left for one of his late business dinners. She slipped in through the back door with urgency in her steps. "Harold," she whispered, setting her purse down on the counter. Her face was pale but determined. She pulled out her phone and pressed play. On the screen, there it was, Logan towering over me, shoving me hard enough to send me sprawling. His words were muffled, but the violence spoke louder than any audio could. I watched myself crumple on the floor, shoulders hunched, hands scrambling for balance. Seeing it from the outside was like watching another man, a stranger I pitied. Clara touched my arm gently. "This," she said, her voice low but firm, "is evidence. No one can dismiss this as clumsiness or exaggeration. It's real, and it means you don't have to be alone in this anymore." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat nearly choking me. If he finds out you recorded this." "He won't," she cut in. "I've kept it safe." "And Harold, listen to me. This is your chance. We can do something with this. My niece, Emily, she's a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. She works in the state prosecutor's office. If there's anyone who can help you, it's her." Her words both steadied and terrified me. The thought of involving someone from the prosecutor's office made my stomach twist. Logan's threats rang in my ears: guardianship, institutions, power stripped away. Still, Clara's gaze was unflinching, a lifeline in a storm. 2 nights later, when Logan was gone again, Clara arranged the meeting. She insisted on hosting it at her house, away from his watchful eyes. The living room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tight. I sat on her old sofa, my hands wringing the brim of my cap, as Clara introduced me to her niece. Emily Jacobs was younger than I expected, mid-30s, with sharp eyes softened by compassion. She carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had spent years navigating tense rooms. She shook my hand firmly and sat across from me, pulling out a leather-bound notebook. "I've heard a little from Aunt Clara," she began, "but I'd like to hear it from you." "Start wherever you're comfortable." So, I told her. My voice faltered at first, but once the dam cracked, the words poured out. The years of silence, the bruises, the threats, the financial control. I showed her the documents Milo had given me, the notes I had copied from the library. Finally, Clara handed her the phone with the video. Emily watched closely, her jaw tightening. When the clip ended, she looked at me with a mix of outrage and resolve. "Harold, you've endured something no one should. But you're not powerless. With this video, with these documents, you have grounds not only for a restraining order, but also for criminal charges. The financial records suggest fraud and possible embezzlement. Combined with the abuse, the case is strong." I shifted in my seat, uneasy. "And if I move forward, he'll know, he'll fight back." "He will," Emily admitted, "but the law will be on your side. We can request immediate protection, a no-contact order. If he violates it, he goes straight to jail. The key is acting now, before he tightens his grip any further." Her confidence was contagious, though fear still gnawed at me. I thought of Logan's sneer, his threats to have me declared incompetent, but I also thought of that video, of Clara's courage to capture it, of Milo's insistence that silence could make me complicit. Emily pulled out a set of documents, sliding them across the table. "These are the initial filings," she explained. "A request for protective measures and a formal complaint of abuse and fraud. It's your choice whether to sign." My hand hovered over the pen. The paper seemed to glow under the lamplight, as though it carried all the weight of my future. I hesitated, my breath uneven. What if Logan found out before the law caught up? What if he came for me, harder than ever? Then I looked up and saw Clara watching me, her eyes full of faith. Emily sat poised, ready to fight for me without hesitation. For the first time, I wasn't alone in the room. With a trembling hand, I picked up the pen. The scratch of ink on paper felt louder than thunder. I signed my name, each letter a declaration. I was no longer silent. I was no longer just his victim. When it was done, Emily gathered the papers with care. "You've just taken the hardest step," she said gently. "From here on, we move together." I leaned back, a strange weight lifting from my chest. The fear hadn't vanished. It still pulsed in my veins, but it was tempered by something new, resolve. As I left Clara's house that night, the cool air brushing against my face, I knew there was no turning back. For better or worse, I had chosen my path, and for the first time in years, it was a path toward freedom. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a place that seemed heavy with the weight of countless stories of betrayal and justice. I sat on a hard bench near the front, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Clara was beside me, her presence steady, while Emily stood ready at the counsel table, with her files neatly stacked. Every beat of my heart pounded in my chest, a drum of both dread and hope. When Logan entered, he looked as though he had stepped out of a magazine, an expensive suit tailored perfectly, a silk tie knotted with precision. He strode into the courtroom with his usual arrogance, casting a quick glance at me that was equal parts scorn and challenge. To the untrained eye, he might have seemed like a successful young executive unfairly dragged into a family dispute, but I knew better, and soon, everyone else would too. The judge, a stern man with silver hair, called the session to order. The quiet buzz of the room hushed as Emily rose to present our case. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and sharp as she handed over the first piece of evidence, Clara's video. The screen flickered, and there it was. Logan, looming over me in the garage, shoving me hard enough that I hit the floor. The gasp in the courtroom was audible. My body stiffened as I watched, but I forced myself not to look away. For years I had hidden the bruises, the fear, the truth. Now, it was plain for everyone to see. Next came the financial documents Milo had helped compile, bank transfers, signatures, patterns of embezzlement too neat to be accidents. Emily explained the timeline clearly, connecting Logan's withdrawals to both my pension account and missing funds from his company. She spoke with the precision of a scalpel, cutting through any illusions he had tried to build. Logan's attorney objected, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, that the video didn't show the entire context, but the judge overruled. The more Emily presented, the tighter Logan's jaw became. His carefully crafted mask of composure began to crack. When it was his turn to speak, Logan rose with false confidence. "This is absurd," he declared, his voice dripping with disdain. "My father is confused. He's old. He doesn't remember things properly. He's been manipulated by nosy neighbors and people who want to ruin me. That video, taken out of context. Those financial records, misinterpreted. I've supported my father for years. Without me, he'd be living in a nursing home." His words cut, not because they were true, but because I recognized them. They were the very lies he had whispered in my ear night after night, twisted to sound plausible to strangers. But this time, he wasn't whispering. He was shouting, his face reddening, his fists clenched. The judge's gavel banged once. "Mr. Grant, control yourself!" But Logan couldn't. His voice grew louder, his words sharper, as he turned toward me. "Tell them, Dad. Tell them you'd be nothing without me. You owe me everything. Every meal, every roof over your head, it's mine. You're mine." Gasps rippled through the room. The mask had finally fallen. Logan was no longer the polished professional. He was the man I saw in the shadows of my home, the tyrant who had ruled my life for years. The judge leaned forward, his expression grave. "Mr. Grant, your behavior today only reinforces the concerns raised in this case. Given the evidence of abuse, financial exploitation, and your demonstrated volatility, I am denying your request for bail. You will remain in custody pending trial." My breath caught. The words echoed through me like a bell tolling freedom. Logan's face twisted in fury as the bailiffs moved toward him. "This is an outrage!" he shouted, struggling as they clasped handcuffs around his wrists. "You'll regret this, old man. You'll regret ever crossing me." His threats bounced off the walls, hollow now that the shackles clicked into place. He was no longer in control. I sat still, tears slipping down my cheeks. They weren't tears of defeat or humiliation. They were tears of release, of a weight finally lifting. For years I had lived under his shadow, but in that moment I realized the shadow had vanished. As Logan was let out, still thrashing against the inevitable, I looked at Clara. She reached for my hand, her grip firm, her smile faint but radiant with relief. Emily leaned close and whispered, "You did it, Harold. This is only the beginning, but today, you won." When the session adjourned, I rose slowly, my body still aching from old bruises, but my spirit lighter than it had been in decades. We walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The air felt cleaner, sharper, as though the world itself had shifted. I took a long breath, filling my lungs. The courthouse steps stretched ahead, but for once they didn't feel like a climb. They felt like a descent into freedom. Clara and Emily flanked me on either side, steady and strong. Behind me, Logan's angry voice was gone, swallowed by the heavy doors of justice. Ahead of me, the sky was wide and blue, For the first time in years, I stepped into it as a free man. When I walked back into my house after the trial, the silence startled me. For years, silence had been dangerous, an omen that Logan was brooding, ready to erupt. Now, it was different. The quiet held no threat, no shadow waiting to pounce. It was a silence that belonged to me, a peace I hadn't felt in so long I barely recognized it. I set my keys on the kitchen counter and looked around. The same furniture, the same pictures on the walls, yet everything felt altered. It was as though the house itself had exhaled after years of suffocation. Still, the memories clung, the yelling, the bruises, the humiliation. Each corner whispered reminders of nights spent walking on eggshells, each room a stage for his cruelty. I sank into my old armchair, the fabric worn but familiar, and closed my eyes. A flood of images washed over me. Logan as a boy, clutching my hand when he was afraid of thunderstorms. Logan as a teenager, scowling when I told him no. Logan as the man who had twisted into my tormentor. When had the bond between father and son unraveled? Had I spoiled him, shielded him too much, mistaken control for love? The ache of losing him as a son was sharp, yet beneath it was a strange relief. For the first time in decades, my life was my own. As the days passed, I began to see more clearly. My silence had been his weapon. Every bruise I hid, every excuse I made, only gave him more power. By speaking out, by signing those papers, by facing him in court, I had chosen truth over fear. And truth, I realized, was the only path to freedom. One morning, I pulled out an old notebook from the desk in my study. Its pages were yellowed, but it felt right to use it. I began to write, slowly at first, then with urgency. I wrote about the control, the threats, the way abuse can creep into a home and disguise itself as duty. I wrote about the shame, the fear, the loneliness. And then I wrote about the moment I stood up, the allies who helped me, the relief of hearing a judge's gavel strike in my favor. When the story was finished, I mailed it to a local support group for elder abuse survivors. I didn't know if they would publish it or if anyone would even read it, but I knew it needed to leave these four walls. Maybe someone else, sitting silently in their own prison, would find courage in my words. Maybe they would see that it is never too late to fight back. In that letter, I told them, don't let fear keep you quiet. Don't let shame keep you hidden. Abuse thrives in silence, but it withers in the light. The truth might sting, but it sets you free. A week later, I stood by my window at dawn. The sun spilled across the horizon, golden light washing the room where I had once cowered. I opened the window wide, breathed in the cool morning air, and let it fill my chest. It wasn't just a new day. It was the first day of the rest of my life. I smiled to myself, not a triumphant smile, but one of quiet certainty. Age is not a sentence, it is not the end. For me, it has become a beginning, a chance to live with dignity, to live without fear, to finally be free. Life has a way of testing the strength we never knew we carried. Sometimes the trials come not from strangers, but from those closest to us, the very people we once trusted most. And when betrayal strikes at the heart, it leaves wounds deeper than any visible scar. Yet even in the darkest corners of that pain, there is a truth waiting to be found. Silence only feeds the shadows, while courage invites the light. Freedom does not always arrive as a sudden rescue or a miracle from the outside. More often, it begins quietly, with a decision to stop hiding, to name the harm for what it is, and to step forward despite trembling hands. It is in that moment, when fear is met with resolve, that the grip of oppression starts to weaken. The path is never easy. Justice can be slow, healing even slower, but each step away from secrecy and toward truth is a step toward reclaiming dignity. And in that reclamation lies the proof that age is not a barrier to change. A new chapter can begin at 60, 70, or beyond, because freedom does not belong to the young alone. It belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it. What matters most is not the years behind us, but the courage we choose in the present. To speak when silence feels safer, to stand when surrender feels easier, to trust that even broken ground can grow something new. The past may shape us, but it does not define us. The choice to live honestly, to live freely is always within reach, and in that choice lies the true measure of resilience. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.